They say that marriage is built on trust, total transparency, and the kind of intimate connection that makes you feel like you're the only two people left on the planet. But what happens when you discover that your partner, the person you've sworn to be honest with for the rest of your life, has been playing a game you didn't even know you were a contestant in? What if the intimacy you thought was organic, impulsive, and deeply personal was actually being tracked, measured, and filed away like a line item on a corporate budget? I found myself staring at the wall in our bedroom, the silence feeling heavier than it ever had before, wondering if the man sleeping beside me was my husband or a lead auditor for my own private life. It's the kind of realization that makes your skin crawl and your heart skip a beat all at once. You spend years believing in a narrative, and then, in a single, terrifying second, you realize the plot has been manipulated by someone you trust more than life itself. Would you confront them immediately, demanding the truth and risking the collapse of everything you've built? Or would you pick up your own pen, sharpen your wits, and decide to write a plot twist they'd never see coming? That was the question hanging over me like a guillotine blade. I was standing at a crossroads, caught between the instinct to scream and the thrill of the hunt. I chose the hunt. It started with a discovery that felt like a punch to the gut, a discovery that made me question every moment of the last 6 months. My husband, a man I adore, a man who has shown me nothing but kindness, patience, and love, had been keeping a secret. And not just any secret, it was a calculated, meticulous, and frankly disturbing record of our private life. I had stumbled upon it by accident, a flash of blue light from a screen that wasn't meant for my eyes, a single glimpse of a spreadsheet that made the air vanish from my lungs. It wasn't just a list, it was a dossier. Every night, every gesture, every nuance of our relationship, quantified. The shock was paralyzing. I remember sitting in the dark of our living room, the glow of the television long since faded, feeling like a stranger in my own home. My mind started racing through every intimate encounter, every whispered conversation, every night where I felt closer to him than I'd ever been. Was any of it real? Or were those just data points in his little experiment? It's a bitter pill to swallow, realizing that your vulnerability has been turned into a metric. But as the initial horror began to recede, a cold, sharp clarity took its place. I love this man. I know his heart, and despite this bizarre, obsessive behavior, I know he isn't malicious. He's analytical, yes. He's organized to a fault, absolutely. But malicious? No. He's the man who brings me coffee every morning before my alarm even goes off. He's the man who holds my hair back when I'm sick and tells me I'm beautiful even when I haven't showered in 2 days. This spreadsheet, this insane, intrusive, borderline unhinged spreadsheet must have been his misguided attempt to fix something or understand something, rather than a weapon meant to hurt me. That didn't make it okay, but it made it manageable. It made it something I could work with. If he wanted to play the role of a data analyst in our marriage, then I would become the master of the variable. I realized right then and there that I wasn't going to have the big talk just yet. I wasn't going to sit him down, pull out the "we need to talk" card, and watch him squirm. That was too easy. If he wanted to keep a ledger of my behavior, then I was going to give him data that would keep him up at night, wondering if he'd lost his mind. I started small. I looked at the Kindle on my nightstand. I'd been reading a trashy, high-octane romance novel, the kind that makes you blush just reading the titles. And I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that he'd been checking my progress bar. He'd been cross-referencing my reading speed with his own little intimacy metrics. So I accelerated. I devoured the chapters I hadn't read, keeping my eyes moving even when my mind was wandering to the absurdity of the situation. I made sure to leave the Kindle open to a page I'd already visited, a bit of psychological warfare designed to make him think I was stalling, or perhaps that I'd grown bored with the narrative. But the real show? That was for later. I needed to disrupt his system. I needed to introduce a chaotic variable that defied his neatly categorized columns and rows. If he wanted an entry for spontaneous desire, I was going to give him something that broke his scale. I waited until the lights were dimmed, the house was silent, and the atmosphere was thick with that artificial domestic normalcy he clearly craved. I initiated. And let me tell you, I didn't just initiate. I gave a performance that would have won me an Oscar if there were a category for gaslighting your husband out of his own obsession. I went all in. I was magnetic, I was unpredictable, and I was entirely unreadable. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, not as a wife, but as a silent observer watching a scientist struggle to read a thermometer that's about to shatter. He was confused. I could see it in the way he looked at me, the slight furrow of his brow, the way his hands hesitated for a second before meeting mine. He was trying to figure out if this fell under his established criteria or if he needed to add a new category. I felt a surge of adrenaline that was far more intoxicating than the act itself. The next day I knew exactly what he would do. He'd wait for me to leave for work, he'd wait for the coast to be clear, and then he'd log in. He'd add his data point. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that his spreadsheet was about to get a very, very confusing entry. The morning after my little performance, the air in our kitchen felt different. It was crisp, charged with a tension that only I understood. My husband, Mark, the man who usually whistled while he ground the coffee beans, was uncharacteristically quiet. He moved with a precision that was almost robotic, his eyes darting toward the counter where I'd left my Kindle, then back to me, then back to the coffee machine. He looked like a man trying to solve a complex equation while the chalk was being wiped off the board mid-calculation. I poured myself a cup of coffee and watched him over the rim of my mug. I felt like a spy in my own home, a master of deception operating right under his nose. I knew exactly what was playing out in his mind. He was trying to figure out the why. Why had I been so different last night? Why had the woman who spent the last 3 days slowly, methodically turning pages of a romance novel suddenly decided to burn the rulebook? To him, I was an anomaly. And to a man like Mark, anomalies are the enemy. I didn't give him a hint of what I was thinking. I played the part of the tired but satisfied wife perfectly. I kissed his cheek, told him I had a long day ahead at the office, and walked out the door with a secret smile playing on my lips. But the moment I reached the sanctuary of my car, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The thrill wasn't just about the prank. It was about reclaiming my own narrative. For the past few months, I had felt a strange, nagging disconnect, like I was living in a house where someone had rearranged the furniture while I was sleeping. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the discovery of that spreadsheet had snapped everything into focus. It was the key to the mystery. He wasn't just loving me, he was studying me. And now, I was studying him back. As I drove through traffic, my mind drifted back to the moment I first saw that spreadsheet. It was late on a Tuesday. I had walked into our home office looking for a stamp, and he had scrambled to close his laptop so fast he'd actually knocked his water glass over. That was the first red flag. But it was the screen flicker, a split second where I saw rows upon rows of dates, times, and what looked like a grading system that kept me up that night. I didn't see the specific content, but I saw the structure. It was cold. It was clinical. It was entirely the opposite of how I viewed our relationship. The guilt hit me, momentarily, like a wave. Should I have just confronted him? Was I being just as toxic as he was by playing these games? I pulled into the parking garage and sat there for a long time. The thing is, Mark isn't a bad person. He's a software engineer, a guy who thinks in logic gates, input-output, and optimization. He spent his whole life trying to solve problems by breaking them down into digestible data. I think, in his twisted engineer brain, he thought he was improving our marriage. Maybe he thought if he could just map out the highs and lows, he could optimize for more happiness. He probably didn't realize that by measuring the fire, he was sucking the oxygen out of it. I couldn't help but wonder what he was doing right now. Was he at his desk, staring at the screen, biting his lip as he typed in, "Performance, unusually high, anomaly detected, re-evaluating baseline"? The thought made me laugh out loud. It was so incredibly absurd that it felt like a sitcom script. Yet this was my reality. I decided that the next phase of my intervention needed to be more than just a performance. It needed to be a message. If I was going to cure him of this spreadsheet obsession, I had to show him that human emotion, especially love, couldn't be reduced to a binary state. I wanted him to see the folly of his tracking, but I wanted him to come to that conclusion on his own. If I told him, he'd just defend his logic. He'd bring up data-driven decision-making and relationship health metrics. But if I made the data meaningless, if I turned the numbers into gibberish, that would force a system reboot. I spent the rest of the day planning. I looked up obscure book tropes, weird emotional responses, and psychological tactics. I wanted to be the wild card variable. If he was tracking the frequency of our intimacy, I'd introduce long, mysterious gaps where I'd simply fall asleep with a book in my hand. If he was tracking the quality, I'd offer feedback that made no sense. Things like, "That was a solid 7, but the pacing felt a bit off in the third act." I wanted to treat him like the character in one of my books. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was becoming the very thing I despised, an analyst of my own marriage. But I told myself this was a necessary evil, a surgical strike to save the patient. When I finally pulled back into the driveway that evening, the house was dark. The stillness felt different tonight, less like a secret, more like a standoff. I walked through the front door, kicked off my shoes, and saw him sitting on the sofa. The laptop was closed, resting on the coffee table like a dormant bomb. He looked up, his eyes searching mine, looking for the woman from the night before, or perhaps looking for the woman he had mapped out in his files. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet. "How was your day?" I walked over, leaned down and kissed him. Not the passionate kiss of last night, but a lingering, gentle one that left him clearly confused. "It was data heavy," I whispered into his ear. He froze. For a second, I thought I'd gone too far. I thought he might actually break down and ask me what I meant. But he just blinked, his jaw tightening. He didn't say a word. He just reached for the laptop, then stopped himself. The game was escalating, and I knew we were approaching the point of no return. The atmosphere in the living room was so thick with unsaid words that I could practically taste the metallic tang of static in the air. Mark didn't reach for the laptop again. Instead, he stood up, his movements stiff and deliberate, and walked toward the kitchen to pour himself a glass of water. He stayed there for a long time, staring out the window into the dark backyard, his back turned to me. I took that moment to scan the room. The Kindle was exactly where I'd left it, but it had been moved, just a quarter inch to the left. Someone had checked it. Someone had checked the page number. I felt a surge of cold, calculated triumph. He was hooked. He was watching the progress bar of my life, oblivious to the fact that I was already miles ahead of his algorithm. I walked over to the kitchen counter, my movements fluid and casual, trying to look like a woman who didn't have a double-edged sword hidden behind her back. "You seem a bit distracted tonight, Mark," I said, my voice dripping with honeyed concern. "Is everything okay at work? You've been so quiet lately. It's almost like you're calculating something." He turned around, and for a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of genuine alarm in his eyes. He quickly masked it with his signature, "I'm just a guy thinking about guy stuff" expression. But it was too late. He knew. Or, at the very least, he suspected that the walls were beginning to talk. "I'm just tired," he said, his voice a little too steady. "Project deadlines, you know? Data migration is a pain." "Data migration," I repeated, tasting the words. "Sounds complicated. Is it hard to keep track of everything? All those variables, all those entries?" He stopped mid-sip, his eyes snapping to mine. He didn't even try to play the "what are you talking about" card. He knew that if he lied about the existence of the spreadsheet, he'd be closing a door he might need to keep open for his own sanity. Instead, he just tightened his grip on the glass. "It's a lot to manage, yeah, but it's worth it. When you get the results right, it's worth all the effort." I felt my heart rate spike, but I kept my face as smooth as a marble statue. "Results," I echoed. "I suppose that's the goal, isn't it? Optimization, efficiency, making sure nothing is ever wasted." I walked closer, entering his personal space until I was right in front of him. I could smell the faint scent of his cedarwood soap, a smell that used to bring me comfort, but now just felt like a byproduct of a carefully curated environment. I reached out and adjusted his collar, a gesture that was half affectionate, half menacing. "I've been thinking a lot about our marriage lately," I said softly, "about how much we've changed, how we're not the same people we were when we met. It's funny how some people try to hold on to the past by tracking it, like a collector putting butterflies in jars. But butterflies, Mark, they don't really like being pinned down, do they? They lose their colour, they lose their magic." He looked at me, and I saw something crack in his expression. It wasn't anger, it wasn't even annoyance. It was fear. Real, raw, existential fear. He looked at me as if he was seeing me for the first time in months, stripping away the spreadsheets and the data points, finally realizing that I wasn't an object to be optimized. I was a person who was watching him play God with our life. "I don't pin them down," he whispered, his voice cracking. I want to know why they fly where they do." "Then stop watching the flight path," I whispered back, stepping away from him, "and start enjoying the view." I walked out of the room, leaving him standing there in the cold silence of the kitchen. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew he was standing there, the weight of his own obsession finally starting to crush him. He wasn't thinking about the spreadsheet anymore. He was thinking about the fact that his wife, the woman he thought he had figured out, had just delivered a monologue that completely undermined the logic of his entire life. I went to the bedroom and lay down on the bed, my mind racing. I was playing a dangerous game, I knew that. I was pushing him into a corner, and when people are cornered, they either break or they lash out. But I was so tired of the secrecy. I was so tired of feeling like my relationship was a laboratory experiment. I picked up my Kindle again. I didn't even turn it on. I just held it in the dark, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the next move. Tomorrow was Saturday. Usually we went for a hike. It was one of our routines. And according to his little spreadsheet, Saturday morning hikes were a high engagement activity with a consistent positive correlation to weekend intimacy. I had to break the routine. I had to go somewhere else. I had to do something that wasn't on his list. I had to become an error code in his system. I wouldn't just be an anomaly. I would be a full-scale system crash. I wanted to see if he could handle reality without his safety net of numbers. I wanted to see if he loved me, or if he just loved the pattern of me. The silence of the house seemed to amplify my thoughts. I wondered if he was crying. I wondered if he was finally deleting the file. I wondered if he was staring at his laptop, realizing that his data was useless. But most of all, I wondered if he would ever, truly, be able to see me as I was, without needing to know the why and the how of my heart. As I drifted off to sleep, I made one final vow to myself. Tomorrow, I wouldn't just be the subject of his study. I would be the one writing the story. Saturday morning arrived with a stillness that felt almost predatory. I woke up long before Mark, my internal alarm clock set not by habit, but by the sheer adrenaline of the game I was playing. I slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb him, and went into the kitchen. I didn't reach for the coffee pot, and I didn't check my phone. Instead, I stood in the middle of the room and listened to the silence of the house. A house that had become a prison of data points and calculated expectations. I looked at the counter where his laptop usually lived. It was gone. He had moved it, probably into his briefcase or back into the office, hiding the evidence of his obsession away from my prying eyes. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. My little comment the night before about butterflies and jars had hit home. He was retreating, fortifying his position. But retreat is just a form of movement, and I was ready to follow him wherever he went. When Mark finally shuffled into the kitchen, his hair dishevelled and his eyes rimmed with the exhaustion of a man who hadn't slept well, he looked at me with a mixture of apprehension and confusion. He didn't say good morning. He didn't ask about his coffee. He just stood there, looking at me as if he were trying to read a map in a language he no longer understood. "I'm not going for a hike today," I said, my voice bright and cheery, entirely incongruous with the heavy atmosphere. He blinked, his brow furrowing. "The weather's supposed to be perfect, though. We always go to the trails on Saturday." "I know," I replied, grabbing my keys and my bag. "But I've been feeling a bit non-linear lately. I think I'm going to go to the city instead. Maybe wander through the botanical gardens or catch an early matinee. You're welcome to come, but I'm not sticking to the schedule." I watched him. I watched his fingers twitch at his sides, the physical manifestation of his internal struggle. He was doing the math in his head. Variable, change of location. Variable, unpredictable behavior. Impact on weekly marital satisfaction metrics. I could practically see the gears grinding. "I have some things to finish up," he said, his voice clipped. "Some stuff for the project." "Of course," I said, leaning in to kiss his cheek, a cool, detached gesture that I knew would drive him absolutely insane. "You do your thing, I'll do mine. We'll compare notes later, right?" The look on his face was worth the price of admission. It was the look of a man who had suddenly realized his map was wrong, his compass was broken, and he had no idea where the trail even started anymore. I walked out the door, leaving him behind in his world of rows and columns, and stepped out into a day that was entirely my own. I didn't go to the botanical gardens. I didn't go to a movie. I drove to a park on the other side of town, found a bench overlooking the pond, and just sat there. I breathed in the fresh air, feeling the weight of the last few months finally beginning to lift. I thought about the spreadsheet again. It was so incredibly silly when you stripped away the hurt. It was a cry for help from a man who didn't know how to express his love without a manual. He wanted to ensure that he never lost me, that he never failed me, so he turned our marriage into an engineering project. But I realized then that I wasn't angry anymore. I was sad for him. I was sad that he couldn't just exist in the moment, that he couldn't just trust that the love was there without having it verified by a time-stamped entry. I wanted to help him, but I knew I couldn't just tell him to stop. He had to realize it himself. He had to feel the void left by the absence of his metrics and realize that the space he was trying to fill with data was actually meant for human connection. I spent the afternoon just walking, letting myself be truly spontaneous. I stopped at a cafe I'd never visited, talked to a stranger for 20 minutes about nothing at all, and bought a book I would never have picked out if I was trying to optimize my reading list. It was liberating. It was the first time in years that I felt like I wasn't performing for anyone, not even for my own reflection. When I finally pulled into the driveway that evening, the sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the lawn. The house looked different to me now, less like a stage for my husband's experiments, and more like a home that I needed to reclaim. I walked through the front door, and the house was silent. Mark was in the living room, sitting on the floor, surrounded by piles of paper. He wasn't on his laptop. He was writing, actually writing, with a pen and a notebook. When he saw me, he didn't try to hide it. He just looked up, his face pale, his eyes weary. "I deleted it," he said. His voice wasn't a confession, it was a surrender. The spreadsheet. I wiped the whole thing, the drive, the backups, the cloud sync, everything. I stood in the doorway, my bag slipping slightly from my shoulder. "Why?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Because I realized," he said, gesturing to the notebook, "that every time I typed in a new entry, I wasn't just recording our life, I was editing it. I was so afraid of missing a beat, or failing to meet a standard, or losing you, that I didn't even notice you were already standing right there, waiting for me to just be with you." He looked at me, and for the first time in months, there was no calculation in his eyes. There was only a terrifying, vulnerable honesty. "I don't need a map," he whispered. "I just need to be here." I felt a lump form in my throat. This was the moment of truth. I could have gloated. I could have pointed out how much time he'd wasted. I could have made him feel the full weight of his foolishness. But instead, I walked over, sat down on the floor next to him, and rested my head on his shoulder. "It's okay," I said. "We're still here." He reached out and took my hand, his grip firm and steady, not like a data analyst, but like a husband. "I missed you today," he said, "even though you were only across town. I missed you." "I was right here," I said. "You just had to look up from the screen." The confession hung in the air, heavier than any spreadsheet. But for the first time in months, it wasn't suffocating. It was cleansing. I sat there on the floor of our living room, watching the light fade from the window, and I realized that my husband wasn't a monster. He wasn't a cold, calculating machine. He was just a terrified man who had tried to build a fortress out of data because he didn't know how to handle the uncertainty of a human heart. He didn't ask me about my day, and he didn't ask me why I'd been acting so strangely. He didn't try to analyze my performance or categorize my mood. He just sat there, clutching my hand as if I were the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become very abstract. "I thought I was making it better," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I thought if I could just see the patterns, I could catch the problems before they started. I thought I could prevent the drift. I didn't realize that the act of measuring it was creating the drift." I squeezed his hand. "You were trying to engineer a miracle, Mark. You can't code a marriage. You can't build a logic gate for love. It's messy, it's chaotic. It's unpredictable by design." He let out a shaky, self-deprecating laugh. "Yeah, I guess I learned that the hard way. I spent so much time tracking the frequency of our intimacy that I stopped being present for the moments themselves. I was so focused on the data of the touch that I forgot the feeling of the touch." We stayed on the floor for a long time, the silence no longer a source of tension, but a sanctuary. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly seeing him. I wasn't looking at the man who curated a spreadsheet. I was looking at the man who was so deeply, painfully invested in us that he'd lost his perspective. It was a kind of tragic love, in a way, a love so intense it had curdled into obsession. But the shift wasn't overnight. Even after the spreadsheet was gone, there was a ghost in the room. Every time he looked at me, I caught him pausing, as if he were waiting for a prompt, waiting for a metric to appear in his head. And every time I walked into the room, I found myself waiting for the click of a laptop lid. We had broken the cycle, but we had to rebuild the trust. We had to learn how to exist without the safety net of the numbers. The next few weeks were a process of rediscovery. We didn't talk about the incident, that's what we eventually called it, but we started living differently. We started doing things that had no purpose. We sat on the porch for hours, watching the sunset without checking the time. We went for long, aimless drives where we didn't use the GPS, just following the road wherever it took us. We started reading books out loud to each other, not to track progress, but just to share the story. It wasn't always easy. I found myself occasionally acting out, just to see if he would fall back into his old habits. I'd be intentionally cryptic, or I'd do something completely outside of our routine, just to see if his eyes would glaze over with that old analytical hunger. But he never flinched. He just stayed present. He stayed with me. There was one night, about a month later, when we were sitting on the couch, just talking about nothing, and he suddenly reached over and put his phone face down on the table. He didn't look at it. He didn't check the clock. He just looked at me and said, "I don't need to know how long we've been talking. I just want to be here." I felt a tear slip down my cheek. It was such a small thing, such a simple, beautiful, non-quantifiable thing. It was the moment I knew we were going to make it. The spreadsheet was gone, but more importantly, the mindset was fading. He was finally learning to be comfortable with the unknown, but I realized that I couldn't just let the memory of that madness disappear entirely. I needed to hold on to it, not as a reminder of his failure, but as a reminder of our growth. I kept the Kindle, and I kept the memory of that performance I'd put on, not because I was proud of the deception, but because I was proud of the outcome. I had shown him that love isn't a variable you can control. It's a force you have to surrender to. Do you ever wonder what your own spreadsheet looks like? We all have them, don't we? The invisible lists we keep in our heads, the expectations we hold for our partners, the metrics we use to judge our own happiness, the way we try to quantify the unquantifiable. We spend so much of our lives trying to keep score, trying to win a game that was never meant to be played. Maybe it's time to close the laptop, put down the pen, and just let the story unfold, no matter where it takes us. What would you have done? Would you have confronted him head on? Or would you have played his game until the rules stopped making sense? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've ever found yourself caught in a data-driven misunderstanding of your own, don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the messy, unpredictable, and entirely human side of love. Because at the end of the day, that's all we really have. The moments we didn't track, the feelings we didn't measure, and the people we love, just as they are. The funny thing about letting go of a secret obsession is that it doesn't just disappear. It leaves behind a vacuum. For weeks, Mark and I existed in this strange, quiet space. It was like we were recovering from a long, arduous illness. We had spent so much energy on his bizarre tracking system, him in the execution, me in the counterintelligence, that once it was gone, we had to learn how to communicate all over again, from scratch, without the crutch of efficiency. One rainy Tuesday, about 2 months after the spreadsheet incident, I came home from work to find him in the kitchen. He was cooking. Not just the usual grilled chicken and veggies that had occupied a permanent, repetitive slot in his weekly meal plan. He was making something complicated, something that required time, patience, and a bit of a mess. The smell of garlic and slow-simmering tomatoes filled the house, a scent that felt warmer, more human than anything I had experienced in years. He didn't check his watch when I walked in. He didn't ask if I was on schedule or if my day had met the expected benchmarks. He just turned, looked at me, and smiled. A genuine, tired, happy smile. "I decided to wing it," he said, gesturing to the bubbling pot. "No recipe, no measurements, just taste." I felt my heart swell. It was such a small metaphor, but it hit me harder than any grand gesture could have. He was finally learning that the best result didn't come from the strictest adherence to the plan. It came from intuition, from being present, from feeling the heat of the stove and trusting your own senses. I went over and wrapped my arms around him from behind. I didn't try to test him. I didn't try to be the wild card variable. I just held him. For the first time in forever, I wasn't watching him to see if he was watching me. I was just there, in the kitchen, in the moment. "It smells amazing," I whispered. "I think it needs more basil," he replied. And for the first time, he didn't sound like he was worried about the consequences of an extra dash. He was just enjoying the process of being a husband, a cook, a human being. That night, as we sat at the dinner table, actually sitting, not rushing to the next task on a list, we talked. Not about work or errands or the state of the relationship. We talked about things that mattered. We talked about our fears, our childhoods, the silly things that made us laugh until our sides hurt. We spent 3 hours at the table. If he had still been tracking, he would have logged 3.0 hours, high connection quality. But he wasn't tracking. He was just listening. He was laughing. He was living. And that's when I knew the healing was complete. The spreadsheet was a symptom of a deeper insecurity, a fear that if he couldn't measure me, he couldn't hold on to me. By letting go of the data, he was finally letting go of the fear. He was trusting that I would stay not because of a balanced ledger of affection, but because I loved him. And that was the most liberating realization of my life. But I still keep that memory in my back pocket. Sometimes, when life feels like it's getting too heavy, or when we start to fall back into the traps of routine and optimization, I think back to that night. I think about the look on his face when I initiated that spicy scene just to mess with his data. I think about the confusion in his eyes, the absolute beautiful chaos of his world coming undone. And I laugh because we survived it. We didn't just survive it, we grew through it. We learned that the most important parts of a relationship are the ones that can't be put into a spreadsheet, the ones that happen in the margins, in the unplanned moments, in the messy, unquantifiable spaces between the entries. I know I'm not the only one who has dealt with this. Whether it's a partner who tracks your every move, a parent who expects perfection, or just the internal pressure we put on ourselves to be optimized, we all know what it's like to feel like a number in someone else's equation. But I'm here to tell you that you are more than a data point. You are more than a line on a chart. You are a person with a story that is yours alone to write. And sometimes, the best way to change the story is to just stop playing by the rules and start living your own truth. Before I go, I want you to think about something. If you had to look at your life right now, objectively, what would you be tracking? What are the metrics you're using to decide if you're winning or losing in your own life? And what would happen if, just for a day, you deleted the spreadsheet? I'd love to hear your take on that in the comments. It's a powerful thing to step outside the lines and just exist. And if you've enjoyed this look into the messiness of real life, the kind that doesn't always have a happy ending on paper, but finds a better one in reality, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're going to be diving into more stories just like this one, exploring the raw, unfiltered, and deeply human experiences that define us. Because life is too short to be lived on a spreadsheet. Life is for the people who dare to be unpredictable, for the ones who embrace the mystery, and for the ones who know that the best parts of the story are the ones that you never saw coming. Thank you for walking through this chapter with me. The dust has finally settled. It's been 6 months since I sat on that bedroom floor, staring at the screen of a laptop that felt more like a ticking bomb than a piece of technology. 6 months since I realized that my husband, in his own misguided, terrified way, was trying to engineer the perfect marriage. Today, when I look at Mark, I don't see an analyst. I don't see a man who needs to see the numbers to believe in the love. I see a man who finally learned that the most important parts of a life together aren't the ones you can track. There was a moment last weekend, one of those mundane, beautiful Saturday afternoons, where he actually forgot his phone in the car while we were out at a bookstore. In the old days, the version of Mark who lived by the grid would have been panicked. He would have been agitated, worried about missed notifications, worried about being off task. But this version? He didn't even notice it was gone until we were halfway home. He was too busy debating with me about whether a certain author was actually a genius or just a master of pretentious prose. We laughed until our sides ached, and in that moment, I realized that we had successfully migrated from a system of measurement to a system of experience. I think about the people who write in, telling me about their own spreadsheets. You'd be shocked by how many of you have reached out, sharing stories about partners who keep scorecards for chores, or friends who track how many times you've called them versus how many times they've called you. It's as if we've all been conditioned to believe that if we can just quantify our relationships, we can protect them from failing. But the truth is, the only way to protect a relationship is to let it be vulnerable. You have to let it be fragile. You have to let it be something that could, theoretically, fall apart if you aren't careful, because that risk is exactly what makes the commitment so profound. I didn't just teach Mark a lesson. He taught me one too. He taught me that even the most logical people are often the most sensitive, and that sometimes their attempts to control their environment are just screams for reassurance. I was so busy feeling betrayed that I almost missed the fact that he was actually trying to build a better life for us. He just chose the wrong tools. And while I'll never regret the spicy scene that served as my own little act of rebellion, I've realized that the real victory wasn't in winning the game. The victory was in flipping the board over and deciding we didn't want to play anymore. We started keeping a different kind of record now. It's not digital. There are no rows, no columns, no formulas. It's a box on the top shelf of our closet. We put souvenirs in there. A ticket stub from a movie we walked out of because it was too boring. A receipt from a diner where the coffee was terrible, but the conversation was life-changing. A leaf from the park where we had that first, honest conversation after the spreadsheet was deleted. It's a messy, chaotic collection of junk, but it tells a story. And unlike the digital dossier, this one doesn't have a performance metric. It just has memories. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this, it's that you don't need to know the why or the how of your partner's love to feel its weight. You don't need a summary report to know that you're doing okay. Trust your gut. Trust the silence between you. Trust the way your partner looks at you when they think you aren't paying attention. And if you ever find yourself feeling like a variable in someone else's equation, don't be afraid to change the value. Be the anomaly. Be the glitch. Be the person who refuses to be solved. Life is an endless series of variables, and most of them are outside of our control. That's not a bug. That's a feature. It's the uncertainty that makes the wins so sweet and the connection so deep. So, stop counting. Stop measuring. Stop trying to optimize the unoptimizable. Just be present. Just be you. And let the people who love you do the same, without the pressure of a report card hanging over their heads. I'm curious, if you could go back to the moment you realized something was fundamentally off in your relationship, would you change how you handled it? Would you be more patient, or would you be more calculated like I was? Every story is different, and I want to hear yours. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you found value in this journey we've taken together, if you felt that spark of recognition in your own life, make sure to subscribe. Because the best stories aren't the ones that follow the script. They're the ones where you toss the script out the window, lean into the unknown, and find out exactly what happens when you stop watching the clock and start feeling the time. There is a strange, quiet power in the aftermath of a total breakdown. For the longest time, I felt like the protagonist of a story that was being ghost-written by a ghost. The ghost of my husband's obsession. But now, when I walk through the house, the walls don't feel like they're judging me anymore. The silence isn't a measurement of my performance. It's just the sound of a home that finally has the room to breathe. Mark is different. He's softer. He stopped trying to solve me like a riddle and started simply knowing me. I remember one evening, just a few days ago, he walked into the bedroom while I was reading. He didn't glance at the page number. He didn't check the clock to see how long I'd been in there. He just sat on the edge of the bed and asked, "How is the book?" And for a second, I waited for the follow-up, the, "Are you almost done?" or the, "How many chapters have you finished?" But it never came. He just wanted to know what I was thinking. That, to me, was the final, definitive end of the spreadsheet era. I think back to the night I decided to play his game, the night I gave that Oscar-worthy performance to disrupt his data. It feels like a lifetime ago. I remember the rush of adrenaline, the delicious irony of feeding his machine information that I knew would baffle him. It was a chaotic, beautiful act of defiance. And honestly, it was the best thing I ever could have done. By feeding the beast, I showed him how hungry it was, and in doing so, I showed him that the beast was never going to be satisfied. You can't feed an algorithm love. You can only feed it numbers, and numbers are cold, dead things. People often ask me, "Do you regret keeping it from him for so long?" And my answer is always the same. No. I needed that time. I needed the space to process the shock, to understand the hurt, and to decide for myself how I wanted to handle it. If I had confronted him the second I found that file, it would have been an argument. It would have been a defense of logic versus emotion. But by taking control of the narrative, by being the one to disrupt the system, I took the power back. I didn't just win a fight, I saved the marriage. If you are out there right now, feeling like your relationship has become a series of checkboxes, if you feel like you're being graded on your affection or tested on your spontaneity, I want you to hear this. You are not a project. You are not a candidate for optimization. You are a person, and your love is not something to be managed. It is something to be experienced. And if the person you're with can't see that, then maybe it's time to show them. Maybe it's time to be the anomaly. Maybe it's time to be the variable that they can't predict. We've started a new tradition, Mark and I. Every time we have a day that feels particularly good, or a night that feels truly connected, we don't write it down. We don't record the metrics. We just look at each other, we acknowledge the moment, and then we let it go. We let it be ephemeral. We let it be a memory that exists only in the space between us, not on a server or a spreadsheet. It's a small, daily act of rebellion against the need to quantify our happiness. And it's the most liberating thing I've ever done. I know that not everyone has a spreadsheet husband. Maybe your struggle is different. Maybe it's a job that demands you track every second of your time, or a social circle that rates your life based on your highlights. The principle remains the same. The world is obsessed with data. It's obsessed with the what and the how much. But the things that actually make life worth living, love, joy, heartbreak, connection, are always in the why. And the why is never found in a column. It's found in the messy, unscripted moments when you just stop, look at the person you're with, and realize that you don't need a map to know you're exactly where you're supposed to be. I want to thank you all for listening to this, for being part of this, and for sharing in the journey of discovering that sometimes the best way to fix a relationship is to stop trying to fix it at all. We've come a long way from that first shocking discovery, haven't we? And if you felt that same spark, that same realization that you're living in a system that doesn't quite fit your humanity, I want you to know you're not alone, and you're not a data point. Before we wrap this up, I want to leave you with one final thought. If you had to delete every record you've ever kept of your successes, your failures, and your scores in life, what would you be left with? Would you be left with a void, or would you be left with a life? I think you'd find that you're left with exactly what you need, and that's a pretty good place to start. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments, the times you decided to break the rules, the times you realized you were being optimized, and the ways you reclaimed your own narrative. Your stories are the reason I'm able to share mine. And if you're looking for more reminders that you are more than a number, more than a line on a chart, and more than a set of expectations, hit that subscribe button. Let's keep exploring the messy, unpredictable, and entirely human side of life together. Life isn't a spreadsheet, it's a story, and I'm so glad we got to write this chapter together. The silence in our home today is different from the silence 6 months ago. Before, the quiet felt like a vacuum, the kind that sucks the air out of the room because there's too much being kept behind closed doors. Now, the silence is just peace. It's the sound of a house where no one is busy auditing the affection, and no one is busy running interference to protect their own sanity. When Mark and I sit in the living room now, the laptop isn't sitting on the coffee table like a silent judge. It's in the office, doing what computers are actually meant to do, handling taxes, emails, and boring logistics. It isn't the third person in our marriage anymore. I think about that spreadsheet often. Not with the same sting of betrayal I felt that first night, but with a strange, detached pity. It was a digital tombstone for a love that didn't need to be buried. It's funny how we try to save things by pinning them down. We think that by cataloguing the frequency of intimacy or the quality of a conversation, we're preserving the relationship. We're essentially trying to mummify our love so it never decays. But in doing so, we kill it. Love is supposed to be alive. It's supposed to shift, to change, to fade and bloom in cycles that don't always make sense on a bar graph. There's a freedom in admitting that you don't have it all figured out. Mark and I had to learn that lesson the hard way. We spent so much energy pretending that we were optimizing our life, when in reality, we were just driving ourselves toward a cliff. But the moment we stopped, the moment we let the car roll to a stop and looked around at where we were, we realized we were actually in the perfect place. We didn't need a destination, and we certainly didn't need a map. We just needed each other, exactly as we were, flawed, messy, and entirely unpredictable. I've had so many people ask me, do you ever worry he's doing it again? And the honest answer is no. I don't worry, because I've changed. Even if he were to start another list tomorrow, I wouldn't be the person who feels like a prisoner to it. I've realized that my worth isn't tied to his data. My value isn't something he can grade. Once you realize that, the spreadsheet loses all its power. It becomes just a piece of software, nothing more. And that realization, that complete, total internal freedom, is something that can't be taken away from me. If you're sitting there listening to this, wondering if your own life has become a bit too measured, if you feel like you're constantly performing for a phantom audience of your own expectations, I want you to take a breath. Just breathe. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You don't have to hit a target. You don't have to optimize your day to be worthy of your own life. You are enough just by existing. You are enough in your messiness, in your exhaustion, and in your beautiful, unquantifiable uncertainty. We spend so much time running a race that has no finish line, trying to earn points in a game that doesn't actually exist. But the moment you decide to step off the track, you realize the sun is shining, the air is clean, and you were never actually in a race to begin with. That's the lesson I've carried with me through all of this. It's the lesson that saved us. It's the lesson that allowed us to finally, truly, be a couple instead of a case study. I want to leave you with a question that I ask myself whenever I feel the urge to keep score in life. If nobody were watching, if nobody were keeping a record, and if there were no data to review at the end of the day, would I still be doing this? Would I still be acting this way? Would I still be with this person? And if the answer is yes, then you're on the right path. If the answer is no, then maybe it's time to stop auditing your life and start living it. Thank you for letting me share this story with you. It's been a journey of discovery, and I hope it's helped you reflect on the things that truly matter in your own world. If this resonated with you, if you've ever felt like a number, or if you've ever had to fight to keep your humanity in a world obsessed with metrics, please hit that subscribe button. Let's stay connected. Let's keep talking about the things that don't fit into a spreadsheet, the things that make us human, and the things that make life worth writing about. We're going to be here, week after week, untangling the complicated, beautiful, and occasionally bizarre stories that define our lives. Because you aren't just a data point in someone else's plan. You're the author. So, start writing like it. Stop measuring the journey and start feeling the road beneath your feet. It's a wild, beautiful, unscripted ride, and you're exactly where you need to be. The final, lingering question I still get from so many of you is whether it was truly worth it. The deception, the silent warfare, the late nights spent wondering if I was losing my mind or losing my husband. Was the Oscar-worthy performance really the right move? Or was it just another layer of dysfunction added to a broken system? And every time I turn that over in my head, I come back to the same answer. It was the friction that caused the spark. Without that final chaotic push, Mark might have spent another year or another decade trying to optimize a love that was already perfect in its imperfections. We were stuck in a loop, a cycle of feedback and expectation, and sometimes the only way to break a loop is to introduce an error that the system simply can't process. I've reached a point where I don't look back at the spreadsheet with fear anymore. I look at it as a relic, a reminder that love isn't something you can capture in a row or a column. It's fluid, it's gas, it's light, and the moment you try to bottle it, it disappears. We're in a place now where we don't even have to talk about transparency or trust, because we're just living it. When you aren't trying to hide anything, and when you aren't trying to record everything, you're just left with the truth of the moment. And the truth is, we're happy. We're genuinely, deeply, unquantifiably happy. If you take anything away from my story, from our journey, let it be this. Don't let anyone, including yourself, turn your life into a data set. You are not a sequence of events. You are not a graph. You are not a metric of productivity or an index of romantic success. You are a human being, and your existence is valid, even when it's messy, even when it's slow, and even when it defies every single expectation you had for it. We're all guilty of keeping score sometimes. We're all guilty of wondering if we're enough based on someone else's hidden criteria. But the next time you feel that pressure, the next time you feel like you're being measured, I want you to remember the girl who stood in her own kitchen, realized her husband was a closeted data analyst, and decided that she was going to be the variable he could never solve. I want you to remember that you have the agency to reclaim your own narrative. You can close the laptop. You can stop feeding the system. You can walk out the door and find a life that isn't lived for a report card. I want to thank you for being the audience for this story. It's been an incredible privilege to share the highs and the lows, the moments of sharp, stinging betrayal, and the moments of profound, quiet realization. You've been with me through the darkest parts of this, and your support has meant more than I can say. It's helped me process my own experience, and I hope it's helped you reflect on yours. Before we move on to the next chapter of this channel, I want you to do one thing for me. Tonight, when you're with the people you love, or even if you're just by yourself, I want you to be completely, unapologetically present. Don't check your phone. Don't worry about what you should be doing. Don't wonder if you're hitting your goals or checking your boxes. Just exist. Just feel, because that's where the real magic happens, in the gaps, in the pauses, and in the unrecorded moments that make up the life you were meant to live. We've navigated the spreadsheet, we've broken the system, and we've come out the other side. Now it's your turn. If you've ever had a moment where you had to tear down the walls and start over, or if you're still in the middle of that process, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. We're building a community here of people who choose the messy truth over the polished lie. And if you're not already subscribed, please join us. There's so much more to explore, so many more stories to tell, and so many more ways to redefine what it means to live a life that is truly, deeply yours. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your empathy. It's been a journey I'll never forget, and I'm so glad you were here to witness it. Keep questioning the system, keep embracing the mystery, and for heaven's sake, keep living your story. The silence in our house tonight is different. It's not the heavy, suffocating quiet of a room where data points are being tallied in the dark. It's the light, airy silence of two people who have finally learned to be present with each other, unburdened by the need to quantify every gesture, every look, and every whispered word. It's been months since that final, messy breakthrough, and the memory of the spreadsheet feels like a strange, distant fever dream. We still laugh about it sometimes, over coffee or a glass of wine, a sharp, relieved sound that reminds us just how close we came to losing the plot entirely. I've learned that the greatest risk in life isn't that you'll fail to measure up to someone's expectations. It's that you'll spend your limited time on this earth trying to track your life instead of actually living it. Mark isn't perfect, none of us are, but he's stopped trying to engineer perfection through an algorithm. He's learned that intimacy isn't a performance to be recorded. It's a living, breathing connection that thrives in the absence of judgment. And I've learned that I don't need to be the variable or the anomaly to be valuable. I just need to be me. Looking back, the entire experience was a collision of two different ways of seeing the world. He was looking through a lens of fear, trying to catch patterns so he wouldn't be blindsided by loss. I was looking through a lens of freedom, trying to navigate a world that felt increasingly rigid. When we finally dropped our lenses and just looked at each other, the complexity vanished. We didn't need a spreadsheet to tell us we were good together. We just needed to feel it. If you're listening to this and feeling a pang of recognition, if you've ever had a partner who treated you like a metric, or if you've ever found yourself keeping a mental scoreboard of your own relationship, know that you are not alone. And know that you have the power to stop. You don't have to wait for a climax or a big reveal to reclaim your autonomy. You can choose to be human, to be messy, and to be unscripted right here, right now. I've seen the comments from so many of you, stories of people who have found their own ways to break free from the tracking mentality, and stories of people who are just realizing that their own lives might be a little too automated. It's heartening to know that we're all navigating this together. We're all learning that the most profound parts of our lives are the ones that can't be stored in a database. They are the ones that happen in the margins, the ones that vanish the moment they occur, leaving behind only the feeling of having lived them. I want to thank you for sticking with me through the end of this particular chapter. You've been more than just an audience. You've been a sounding board, a community, and a witness to a transformation that I truly believe saved my marriage. This channel is going to continue to dive into these raw, real-life moments, the ones that don't fit into a tidy box, the ones that challenge our perspectives, and the ones that remind us what it means to be alive in a world that wants to turn us all into numbers. Before we close this out, think about the one thing in your life that you've been measuring too closely. Maybe it's your career, your fitness, your social life, or your relationship. What would happen if you let it go for just 24 hours? What would happen if you stopped looking for the results and just focused on the experience? I challenge you to try it. Be the person who stops looking at the score and starts playing the game for the joy of the movement. If this story helped you see your own situation in a new light, let me know. Drop a comment below about what you'd do if you had the chance to delete the spreadsheet in your own life. And if you're new here, or if you've been with us through every part of this journey, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We have so many more stories to unravel, so many more lessons to learn, and so many more ways to push back against the pressure to be optimized. Life is meant to be a story, not a ledger. It's meant to be filled with twists, turns, and moments that make no sense at all. So, go out there and be unpredictable. Be the person who creates memories that don't need a timestamp. Be the person who finds joy in the unquantifiable. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for helping me realize that the most beautiful parts of my life were the ones I never saw coming, and that I never, ever needed to track.